I'm Stuart Tyner, one of the pastors at the La Sierra University Church, and I want to tell you about a new Pacific Press book called Searching for the God of Grace. Many years ago, my mother, when she was still a teenager, became a Seventh-day Adventist. But the Adventism that she was handed in her youth was an Adventism that showed most of its emphasis on behaviors. What we could do and couldn't do, how to keep the Sabbath and what things not to do, what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat, and those kind of things. And it was the Adventism that she passed on to us kids. It wasn't a real happy time. You know those days as well as I do when our emphasis was on behavior and not about a relationship with Jesus. When I was in the 7th grade, I learned a song that I began singing at churches. It was a song about the theme of the Bible and the plan of salvation, which was about the second coming. But the chorus of the song asked questions like this: are you ready for Jesus to come? Are you faithful in all that you do? Have you fought a good fight? Have you stood for the right? Have others seen Jesus in you? Are you ready to stand in your place? Are you ready to look in his face? Can you look up and say, "This is my Lord"? Are you ready for Jesus to come? Trouble is, the more that I sang that song to other people, the more discouraged I got myself. I was doing my best to be a good Adventist Christian boy, but I found that I wasn't gaining victories and I had no peace with God whatsoever. Then a few years ago, I bought a book called The Grace Awakening. I gave it to my wife. I thought she's a graceful person and she could love reading this. And when I began to read it myself, I argued with the book. Surely that's not what the Bible is teaching us. If you've been one of those Adventist Christians as well, been afraid of a grace orientation, afraid that it takes us away from our emphasis on obedience, the centrality in our life of the commandments, our overcoming, then you might like to read this book and see how the gospel is all throughout the Bible and throughout history. The emphasis has been to win us to the gospel story. If you're someone in our church family who has been afraid that grace would take us different places than Seventh-day Adventists ought to be, please read this book and see how Adventist the message of grace is, the everlasting gospel. And if you are a young adult, or you have in your family a young adult, or in your church family, young adults who are worried about what is at the center of the Adventist faith, I invite you to read this story about how the gospel of God's enduring grace is the center of everything we believe as Seventh-day Adventists. Ellen White said it in Gospel Workers, page 315. The sacrifice of Christ as an atonement for sin is the great truth around which all other truths cluster. And then she continues, in order to be rightly understood and appreciated, every truth in the Word of God from Genesis to Revelation must be studied in the light that streams from the cross of Calvary. I found in the last 15 years of study that has been the message of the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's been all throughout the history of the Christian church and in Adventist history as well. Over and over again, we've tried to unbury the treasure of the gospel. I hope you'll find it in Searching for the God of Grace, published this year by Pacific Press.